what if the very safety rules, the ones designed to keep you alive, are actually the exact things putting you in lethal danger?
It is a terrifying thought, honestly. We carry around so many deeply held, completely invisible assumptions about human error and risk.
Right.
And we're going to drag those into the light today.
Exactly. Because today, whether you are leading a massive corporate restructuring or like managing a construction site, or you're just insanely curious about the hidden anatomy of catastrophic failures, we are going to fundamentally change how you view accidents.
Yeah, we really are.
And our guide for this deep dive is this brilliant book by Steve Smith. It's called Safety Science for Outdoor and Experiential Education. Were we lucky or were we good?
Such a great title.
It really is. Now, the book uses the outdoor education industry as its testing ground, obviously.
Yeah.
But the lessons we're pulling out today, they are completely universal.
Oh, absolutely. They trace all the way back through the industrial factories of the 1850s, through nuclear meltdowns, and straight into modern space shuttle disasters.
Yeah, it's a massive scope. We're essentially going on a journey from a purely mechanistic view of risk, where we just, point at broken parts or fire the bad apple, to a complex humanistic view of how systems actually fail.
Right, moving away from just blaming the person on the front line.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this with a story that genuinely had me holding my breath while I was reading it.
Oh, I know the one. It is a harrowing place to start, but it perfectly illustrates the stakes of everything we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, so it's 1998. The author, Steve Smith, is a highly trained, newly hired mountaineering instructor.
Right.
And he's on a personal climb with a friend in the North Cascades of Washington State. They're descending this notoriously steep, snowy area called Asgard Pass.
Just the name sounds intimidating.
I know, right? But it's early summer, the sun is shining, the snow feels soft, and they decide to glissade, which basically means sliding down the snowy slope on your bottom.
Yeah, kind of like a natural luge course.
Exactly. So Steve is sliding down this seemingly benign, untouched snowpack, just enjoying the ride. And then, without any warning at all, the floor just falls out.
Yeah.
The world goes entirely black.
He essentially drops through a trapdoor in the mountain.
Right into a hidden, freezing waterfall hole.
Right.
The snow had melted from underneath due to running water, creating this massive subterranean void.
It's literally a nightmare scenario.
So he falls into this dark, roaring river of freezing meltwater, and he's wedged tight between a solid rock wall and the snow ceiling.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. His arms are pinned flat to his sides by the sheer weight and bulk of his heavy mountaineering backpack, and his feet are just, dangling over some dark, narrow constriction in the ice.
He can't even move.
He can't even take a breath unless he violently tucks his chin to create this tiny momentary air pocket against the rushing water. He is literally freezing to death and drowning at the exact same time.
And, the book details this profound psychological shift in that moment. After the initial frantic panic, he describes feeling a strange sense of peace.
Wait, really? Peace?
Yeah, like a resignation. The freezing water was numbing his brain, and he was just drifting away. He was ready to let go.
That is wild. But then, and this is the crazy part, a sudden, violent jolt of pure terror just hits him out of nowhere. Adrenaline takes over.
Survival instinct kicks in.
Completely. He thrashes his shoulders, manages to just barely unbuckle his backpack's sternum strap, and gets his body out of the direct flow of the waterfall.
But he's still trapped, right? Deep inside this icy cavern.
Right. And his ice axe was ripped away in the fall, so he literally has to dig and tunnel his way up and out of the snow and ice with his bare, freezing, bloody hands.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, until he finally punches through the crust and pops out into the blinding sunshine.
Surviving that is miraculous, but, the physical survival isn't actually the core of the story. It's the psychological aftermath that sets up our entire framework today.
Yeah, because he buries the story.
Yeah.
He tells absolutely no one except his climbing part.
Right.
He's a professional mountaineering instructor, and he gets hit with this crushing wave of imposter syndrome. His internal monologue is essentially like, if I can't even keep myself alive on a sunny day hike, how can any organization trust me to lead students?
If I tell my bosses, I'll be fired.
Exactly. My career is over. So he goes home, dries off his gear, and acts like it never happened.
And that is such a deeply relatable human reaction. The fear of professional ruin completely overrides the logic of reporting the hazard, but the consequence of that silence is devastating.
Because he hit his near miss, the map of that hazard remained completely blank for the wider community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That invisible waterfall hole at Asgard Pass stayed a secret, and over the next 2 decades, multiple people paid the price.
Oh, man.
Yeah. In 2010, 2011, 2016, and 2017, hikers glissaded down that exact same route, fell into that exact same hole, and they did not survive.
That is just, it makes me think of an antivirus software on a computer network.
Hmm.
Like, burying an incident out of shame is like the antivirus detecting a critical network-destroying malware threat, but feeling too embarrassed about getting infected to alert the central server.
Right.
The entire system remains vulnerable because the one node that possessed life-saving data decided to stay quiet.
That is a perfect analogy. The system cannot adapt to information it doesn't have.
Hmm.
The author actually brings in a quote from researcher Brene Brown here. He says, "When you don't own your story can own you."
Wow. Yeah, that fits perfectly.
Right. What Steve's experience at Asgard Pass so vividly illustrates is that psychological safety is the absolute prerequisite for physical safety.
Definitely.
When an organization's culture makes people terrified of being blamed or shamed or fired, they will inevitably hide their mistakes. And when near misses are hitting, the organization loses its only opportunity to learn before a fatality actually occurs.
And the book actually provides a beautiful counterexample to this. There's a story about an outdoor staff trainer at Smith Rock in Oregon.
Oh, the Slipknot story.
Yeah, so he is teaching a group of new hires. And from day one, the environment is explicitly, intentionally set up to be psychologically safe.
Which is rare, honestly.
Right. But the trainees are treated as peers, as adult learners, and they're constantly encouraged to challenge the instructors.
Okay.
Well, the trainer is up on a ledge, multitasking, talking to the group, and he goes to tie a redundant double-bite overhand knot to rappel down. But he's distracted, and he
Uh-oh.
accidentally ties a slip knot, a deadly, frictionless slip knot. He is seconds away from leaning his full body weight back over a 100-foot cliff.
But the tragedy doesn't happen.
No.
Not because of better equipment, but because of the culture. A brand new trainee, someone with literally the least power in that dynamic, saw the bad knot and felt entirely empowered to speak up and stop the senior instructor right before he weighted the rope.
Because the trainee wasn't paralyzed by the thought of, who am I to question the boss, or what if I look stupid? That psychological freedom literally saved a life.
It really did.
But that raises a massive question. If psychological safety is so obviously beneficial, why did Steve feel such intense shame in the first place? Like, where did this pervasive, deeply ingrained corporate culture of blaming the worker actually come from?
To understand the origin of that blame, we have to map out what the book calls the 4 ages of safety management. We have to go way back to the 1850s, the heart of the Industrial Revolution, which kicks off the age of technology.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, prior to this, in the craft and agrarian eras, a blacksmith or a carpenter was largely responsible for their own safety using their own hand tools. The risks were known and scaled to the individual.
Right.
But suddenly, millions of workers are pulled off farms and thrown into massive, deafening factories surrounded by heavy, entirely unfamiliar, high-speed machinery.
And the nature of the hazards completely changes. You stop seeing individual injuries and start seeing massive mass casualty events. Like, the book highlights the infamous 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York City.
Yes.
You had 146 garment workers die in a matter of minutes. And they didn't just die because of a fire. I mean, they died because the fire escapes instantly collapsed, and management had literally padlocked the exit doors from the outside to prevent workers from taking unauthorized breaks.
It was a completely horrific event, and because the disasters of this era were so heavily driven by physical infrastructure like boilers exploding or buildings collapsing, the entire focus of safety management became rooted in equipment and engineering.
Right, focus on the machines.
Exactly. The prevailing logic was, if we engineer the technology to be perfectly safe, the workplace will be perfectly safe. But running parallel to that engineering focus was a very specific, very dark philosophy about the workers themselves.
So here we go.
In 1911, an engineer named Frederick Winslow Taylor published a book called The Principles of Scientific Management. This gave rise to Taylorism.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I always thought Taylorism was just about efficiency. A guy with a stopwatch breaking a task down into tiny repetitive motions on an assembly line.
Sure, that's part of it.
But Taylor didn't just want efficiency. He harbored an active, intense disdain for the human beings doing the labor. He explicitly wrote that workers were inherently lazy, deceptive, and that to be a truly good worker, a man needed to be, and this is a direct quote, as stupid and phlegmatic as an ox.
It is an incredibly grim view of humanity. Taylor's core belief was a total separation of thinking from doing. Management does all the thinking. The worker is merely a biological machine executing the doing.
Wow.
He believed workers had to be strictly controlled by managers because, left to their own devices, they were fundamentally flawed and would just ruin the perfect system.
I genuinely struggle to buy that, though. I mean, surely, by the early 1900s, company owners realized that treating your workforce like phlegmatic oxen was terrible for actual productivity. Did anybody challenge Taylor on this?
Well, there was pushback from unions, certainly, but management loved it because it completely absolved them of moral responsibility. If the
Oh.
worker is just an ox and the ox breaks the machine, it's the ox's fault. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the legal system of the time essentially codified Taylorism with what historians now call the unholy trinity.
The unholy trinity.
Yeah, these were three distinct legal defenses that formed an impenetrable shield around employers, completely insulating them from liability for workplace accidents.
Let's break those down because honestly, you can still feel the ghost of these laws in modern corporate HR policies today.
Absolutely. The first was contributory negligence. This meant that if the worker was found to be even 1% at fault for their own injury, maybe they slipped, maybe they looked away for a second, the employer owed them absolutely nothing.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Second was the fellow servant rule. If another worker on the factory floor caused your injury, the employer wasn't liable. Your beef was with your coworker.
Of course.
And third was the assumption of risk doctrine. Management argued that you knew the factory was dangerous when you accepted the wage, therefore you assumed all the risk of dying there.
So the entire system is perfectly engineered to conclude. The system is flawless, the worker is the liability.
Precisely.
And the deeply unsettling part is how much we still rely on that 1850s logic today.
Hmm.
The author brings up the tragedy of Gary Falk and the Grand Tetons in 2016. Gary was a highly experienced climbing guide who died when a piece of webbing tied with a water knot, which was attaching him to an anchor, failed.
Right.
And when you look at the official safety investigation that followed, it is pure age of technology thinking. They focused almost entirely on the physical knot.
They did. The official response was to institute new, rigid rules requiring annual visual inspections of life-critical knots. But here is the critical failure of that logic. Material science data actually shows that water knots tied in that specific tubular webbing can slip and fail after just 100 cycles of being loaded and unloaded with body weight.
Wow, just 100.
Yes, and a guide might hit 100 cycles in a few weeks. An annual visual inspection does absolutely nothing to prevent the physics of that failure.
Right.
But by hyper-focusing on the physical equipment, the organization didn't have to look at the socio-technical factors. They didn't have to look at the systemic pressures on the guides, the fatigue, the schedule, or the training protocols.
But eventually, this pure engineering approach hits a wall. Like if firing the bad worker and replacing the rope didn't actually stop the accidents from happening, management was left with a math problem. They were losing money.
Exactly.
They had to figure out what was actually causing the accidents to protect the bottom line, and that desperation opened the door for an insurance man named Herbert William Heinrich in the 1930s.
Which brings us out of the age of technology and into the age of human behaviors. Heinrich is an absolute titan in the history of safety science. In 1931, he published a book that introduced Heinrich's law, which most people recognize today as the famous safety triangle.
I've seen this in like every corporate orientation ever.
Right. At the very bottom of the triangle, you have 300 near misses or unsafe acts. In the middle, you have 29 minor injuries. And at the tiny peak at the top, you have one major catastrophic injury or fatality.
And the assumption this triangle baked into corporate culture is massive. It strongly implies that the exact same things causing the 300 minor trips and slips at the bottom are the exact same mechanisms causing the catastrophic fatalities at the top.
Yes.
It basically tells managers, hey, if you rigidly enforce rules to eliminate all the spilled coffee and untied shoelaces at the bottom, you will mathematically prevent the crane collapse at the top.
It does. It raises an important question, though. Where did Heinrich get this perfect ratio? This is a detail that I find absolutely fascinating from a historical perspective. Heinrich never published his methodology. He never released his original source data.
Wait, really? Never?
Never. Modern researchers have tried to find the thousands of insurance claims he supposedly analyzed, and they don't exist. He even altered the ratios in later editions of his book without explaining why.
That is wild.
Yet, his completely unverified, mathematically flawed theory shaped global workplace safety for a century. We just blindly accepted it.
Because it is an incredibly convenient, comforting story for management to tell themselves. Just like his other major contribution, the domino model.
Oh, yes.
Heinrich argued that accidents are linear, like a row of dominoes falling one after the other. You have ancestry, fault of person, unsafe act, accident, and injury. And the key domino, the one you have to pull out to stop the chain reaction, is always the unsafe act committed by the fault of person.
It creates a worldview where incidents are simple, predictable, and always caused by a single bad action by a single person in a vacuum.
But that's like thinking you can prevent a massive 50-car highway pileup solely by making sure every single driver's tires are perfectly inflated to the exact PSI. It completely ignores the fact that they are driving through a blinding blizzard on black ice. It ignores the environment the human is operating inside of.
It ignores the environment entirely. But Heinrich's theories gave rise to massive corporate safety campaigns aimed entirely at modifying worker behavior. Companies created these mocking cartoon characters like Otto Know Better, as in ought to know better, and oh, will he ever learn.
Wow.
The automotive industry famously ran massive public relations campaigns blaming traffic accidents on the nut behind the wheel.
A nut behind the wheel.
Yeah. Why? Because if it's the driver's fault, the auto manufacturers don't have to spend millions engineering seatbelts or shatterproof glass.
Cars don't kill people, people kill people. We see this exact mindset surviving everywhere today. Like the book mentions a modern wilderness therapy program that has a strict policy. Anytime a company vehicle is involved in a crash, their very first step is to immediately drug test the driver.
Emily.
Or look at organizations that claim to use the modern 5 whys method for incident investigation, asking why 5 times to find the root cause, but really they're just using it to find the one who to blame in fire.
But as we moved into the late 20th century, technology and systems grew exponentially more complex. You couldn't just blame Otto Know Better for massive system-wide catastrophes. A single worker tripping doesn't cause a nuclear meltdown.
Right. How do you explain the 1979 Three Mile Island nuclear incident using Heinrich's linear dominoes? You can't.
No, you can't.
Because in that partial meltdown, the control room operators didn't actually break the rules. They followed the procedures they were trained on. But the procedures themselves were completely inadequate for the cascading, contradictory instrument failures they were facing.
Exactly.
It wasn't human error. The human was doing exactly what the system asked. The system itself failed.
And that paradigm shift pushes us out of human behaviors and into the age of organizational management and ultimately the age of complexity.
Right.
And nothing cemented this shift quite like the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. On a purely mechanical level, the shuttle exploded because a rubber O-ring failed in unusually cold weather. But sociologist Diane Vaughan deeply investigated the disaster and coined a brilliant term to explain the real mechanism of failure, the normalization of deviance.
Because the engineers actually knew the O-rings might fail in the 18-degree weather. They vehemently warned NASA management not to launch. So how does a room full of the smartest rocket scientists on Earth let that happen? That doesn't just sound like a bad culture. That sounds like willful negligence.
What's fascinating here is the psychological drift that Vaughan uncovered. Normalization of deviance isn't about evil people making malicious choices. It's about how a team takes a small, seemingly necessary shortcut, maybe to meet a deadline or save a budget.
Right.
They take the shortcut and no disaster happens. The absence of a disaster psychologically validates the shortcut. So the shortcut becomes the new official baseline.
Ah, I see.
Over years, NASA had seen minor damage to O-rings on previous flights, but the shuttles always came home safe. So a flaw that should have stopped a launch became accepted as a normal, manageable risk.
Wow.
The root cause wasn't the weather. It was immense political pressure, financial constraints, and an organizational culture that had slowly drifted into extreme danger without realizing it. You can't fix that by firing one bad employee.
No, you have to fix the organization. And the book brings this complex systemic view back to outdoor education with a truly heartbreaking case study, the 2008 Mangit-Popo Gorge tragedy in New Zealand.
Yeah, this one is tough.
It really is. A group of students and their teacher were exploring a narrow river canyon when a sudden thunderstorm caused a massive flash flood. They were trapped on a ledge, and ultimately, when they attempted to escape, 6 students and the teacher drowned after being swept over a deadly low-head dam.
It is a devastating, tragic story. And if you look at it through the old age of human behaviors lens, you might just point at the young instructor on the ground, Jody, and say, she made a bad call leading them off the ledge. Pull the fault of person domino. Case closed.
Exactly.
But when the official inquiry dug in, they didn't find one bad decision. They found a massive, complex web of organizational failures.
The list of intersecting pressures is staggering. Let's break down how this actually happened. The outdoor center had high staff turnover and terrible institutional record-keeping.
Right.
The field manager, who possessed the most local knowledge, had been away for a month and only returned the day before. The very morning of the flood, a surprise external safety audit began.
Which is huge. Think about the cognitive bandwidth it takes up.
Exactly. The leadership was so completely distracted by auditors walking around with clipboards that they rushed through the morning protocols. The weather report they pulled was from a cheaper, basic subscription service, and it critically left out the specific word, thunderstorms.
And the complexity compounds from there. The medical forms the center used were poorly designed.
Right, the forms.
One of the students who died, Tom, had cerebral palsy, which significantly affected his physical coordination and swimming ability. But the form didn't capture that nuance, so the instructors didn't know.
And on top of all of this, because of staffing shortages, they sent Jody a newly hired instructor who had never been in the gorge in high water. In there alone, without a secondary instructor, and with no map of the high water escape routes.
So she was entirely isolated.
So what does this all mean? If we use the old mechanistic view, we drug test Jody, fire her, and say, problem solved.
Yeah.
But when we look at the complexity of the ecosystem, we see that she was essentially set up to fail by a dozen different invisible interacting systemic pressures. The dominoes didn't start falling in the canyon. They were falling weeks and months before she even walked into the water. The missing word on a weather report interacted with a surprise audit, which interacted with a poorly designed medical form. That is the hallmark of the age of complexity. Incidents aren't linear. They are the unpredictable result of normal workplace pressures dynamically colliding.
That is the core of the humanistic approach to risk management. It's moving away from trying to find the single broken gear and instead looking at the health of the entire ecosystem. Which leads us to the ultimate question.
Which is?
If risk is this complex, how do modern organizations actually measure and manage safety?
Because for decades, the gold standard has always been the poster on the break room wall that says 0 accidents. But as we saw with Steve trapped in the waterfall at Asgard Pass, demanding a goal of absolute 0 just creates a culture of shame where people hide their near misses.
Precisely. Eric Hollnagel, a major thinker in modern safety science, suggests we replace the aspirational punitive goal of 0 accidents with a concept he calls target centum.
Target centum.
Yes. Centum is just the Latin root for 100. Instead of focusing obsessively on eliminating the negative, organizations should shift their energy to aiming for 100% success in their daily operations.
So focus on the presence of success rather than the absence of failure.
Yes. Hollnagel uses a brilliant analogy to explain this shift. Think about a massive supermarket.
Sure.
We only ever notice the global supply chain when we walk in and they are out of the specific brand of milk we want to buy. We complain about the failure, but we never walk into a fully stocked grocery store, track down the manager, and say, congratulations on the miraculous, infinitely complex, perfectly timed global logistics system that resulted in this flawless display of fresh produce today.
That is so true. We take the overwhelming majority of successes completely for granted.
We do. In safety science, this shift is known as moving from safety sirs to safety to.
Safety I and safety II.
Right. Safety I is Taylorism and Heinrich. It's obsessively studying what goes wrong, trying to find the broken part, and adding more rules. Safety 2 means deeply studying why things normally go right. I see.
In a complex, unpredictable world, how are your workers constantly adapting to save the day? How are they succeeding despite the flawed, bureaucratic systems they are forced to work inside of? If management understands how success is actually created on the front lines, they can support those workers better.
That is such a powerful, fundamental shift in perspective. Whether you are leading a corporate board of directors, managing a bustling restaurant kitchen, or rock climbing in the Cascades, when things go wrong, you always have a choice.
Yes.
You can choose to blame, or you can choose to learn. You cannot do both.
And choosing to learn means deliberately creating a psychological environment where people aren't terrified of Otto No Better's ghost lurking behind them with a pink slip.
Right. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the evolution of how we view risk, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The book briefly touches on a fascinating concept called safety clutter.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want you to think about your own workplace right now. Think about the handbook, the checklists, the compliance policies you interact with every single day.
Yeah. Now ask yourself, How many of those rules are actually practically designed to keep you physically safe, and how many of them are actually just safety clutter? Bureaucratic armor designed purely to protect the organization from liability if you get hurt.
Wow. And if that mountain of safety clutter is consuming your cognitive bandwidth and distracting you from the real dynamic hazards in your environment,
Uh-huh.
are those rules actually making you less safe? Suddenly, that clean, simple binary X-ray machine we talked about at the beginning of the show looks a lot less
It
useful.
really does.
The murky, complex waters are where the real work happens. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and take a closer look at the dominoes in your own life.